very different things. Yes. First, I need to make some introduction on those collections of the 17th, 18th century Jesuit books in China, and then in the second part of my presentation, I would give, if I have enough time, some 20 pictures with provenance indications and problematic against concerning identification and so on and so on, because this is a really interesting field of research in which I spent a lot of time. So I will try to start first with a general introduction, because I think that, Jesuit libraries in China, 17th, 18th century is not very common, I suppose. So I need some introduction. Okay. The Jesuit mission in China, as you understand me well, yeah. The Jesuit mission in China, roughly between 1600 and 1770, was confronted with a highly civilized society in China, with a very old literary culture in which learning, books, and libraries had a very prestigious place. Therefore, they adapted their own methods by focusing on contemporary Western scholarship and books as a missionary tool to impress and convince the Chinese literati of their Jesuit Western superiority. Already since about 1600, one of their founding fathers, Matteo Ricci, and his immediate successor, Niccolo Longobardo, both Italians, started a real master plan of introducing, despite the enormous logistic obstacles, a representative library of Western books on all aspects of contemporary late humanistic science and culture, as a base of a systematic program of translation into Chinese and of the Jesuit scientific, technological, and of course proselytizing actions. The implementation of this master plan started with the return of Nicolas Trigault from China to Europe for searching precisely up-to-date books, instruments, funds, and of course also new Jesuit novices for the mission. As for the books and the book acquisition of instruments, this was entrusted to a young Jesuit polymath, former student of 40 academies throughout Europe, former member of the Accademia delle Lincei in Rome, Johann Schreck-Drensius, who collected as a connoisseur thousands of books during their European tour in 1616, 1618, among others on the Frankfurter Buchmesse and in the Officina Plantiniana in Antwerp, where on one day in December 1616 they bought 332 books. We have the complete and detailed list. Together with books offered by Pope Paul V, the Bibliotheca Pontificia, this whole collection, according to Chinese calculations, about 7,000 items arrived from Lisbon in Macau in 1619 and in the Jesuit College of Beijing in 1625. In the next 150 years, the acquisition process was pursued, although in a less linear and systematic way, and the book supply was continually enriched in order to keep the Jesuit instruction in China as updated as possible. This happened by an active acquisition program through the Europe-spanning Jesuit networks, sometimes guided from the Jesuit Generalate in Rome, through purchases, but especially through provoked donations. Donations of free author copies, donations of doubles and triples searched throughout the private libraries of scholars and expected as eleemosinas and an act of piety toward the mission, donations by the Jesuit provinces as equipment of the local missionaries, and so on. A considerable part of this process can be followed through inscriptions in the preserved books and archival sources, on which I will return immediately. By this, the Jesuit libraries in the major centers in China, such as Beijing, with 3 Jesuit libraries, the Portuguese Namtang and Dongtang, and the French Baitang, and the Colegio da Madre de Deus in Macau, counted many thousands of Western books accumulated over almost 2 centuries, and minor centers such as Hangzhou, etc., had several hundreds of them. As a consequence of the anti-Christian decree of 1724, many Jesuit centers were gradually left and their books concentrated in the Beijing Portuguese College of Nantang. When the Jesuit Society was then suppressed in the Portuguese realm and thus also in China in 1759, and when the last Jesuit died in 1828, the collection was entrusted to the Russian mission in Beijing. From there, it was for the most part restituted in 1858 to the Lazarist fathers who restarted the Catholic mission in China, rekindling the name of the former French college Beijing. This collection, now called Beijing Library, enlarged with more recent acquisitions, was thoroughly described and repertoried by Hubert Verhaeren, and the inventory was published in 1949. At that time, there were still 4,100 items, which comprised much more volumes, as complete series of journals, for instance, were counted as one item. Shortly later, the collaboration was confiscated by the Chinese state under the Maoist regime about 1950, and it was for a long time considered as lost or destroyed, until it was by fortune unearthed in the early 1960s and is now carefully kept and protected within the compound of the National Library of China in the Haitian quarter of Beijing. The books are part of the Western Precious Books there and are in principle accessible with the necessary authorization. I had occasion myself to see a series of selected items in the spring of 2010, thanks to the assistance of a young Chinese lady, Zhao Dajing and Liu Xumei. Returning now to the books and their inscriptions. First, the 4,100 books preserved until now are only part of the books once circulating in China, as many were lost. My research through Jesuit letters and monographs produced in China in the 17th, 18th century has shown the presence of at least 1,700 other titles, now lost. Of the 4,100 preserved books, 2,158, or almost 52%, have one or more inscriptions, from monumental inscriptions until only some letters and initials. The inscriptions consist of signatures of first owners, the voorbesitzer. 258, or 11%, inscriptions are referring in much details to an act of donation. Further, there are reading remarks, marginal or interlinear observations, annotations, including meteorological ones, altogether testifying the real use of these books, which were not part of a sleeping library, neither of a library of prestige, but really of an active library. As for the Provenance inscriptions proper, they refer to the name of the donators, the act of donation expressed in a series of formulas such as ex dono, datus, donatus, and so on, the motives and the context of the donation, the background, not seldom speaking of feelings of friendship and loyalty between the donator and the addressee in China, sometimes even expressed with a complete poetical propempticon or farewell poem. Refer also to the name of the addressee, either the Jesuit Society in China in general or a particular missionary. The persons, locations, or institutions involved as donators, I could identify almost all, and I could make a kind of sociogram of them, which gave an original and detailed idea of the social spread of the support towards the China mission among Europeans and of the intellectual interest in Europe toward China after the publicitary success of such major works as Martino Martini's Novus Atlasinensis of 1654. The donators belonged to the Jesuit Society, either individual fathers from the top of the hierarchy to the bottom, or to local colleges and provinces supporting their own individual fellow fathers or the Jesuit mission as such. The donators belonged sometimes also to other religious congregations, secular priests, from parish priests to cardinals. Noble patronage was recognized in the case of secular authorities from Emperor Leopold I of Austria to Sicilian baroni. We recognized academies and academicians. We recognized finally also common people, among them members of some well-defined professional groups, such as librarians and military or naval officers. Further, the inscriptions refer also to the allocation of the books inside the China mission, either to the mission in general in Macau or to a particular location, for instance, Hangzhou, Beijing, etc., even when this was susceptible to later removals inside the mission. Books which were private possession of one particular missionary are rather rare. A very special case is the series of books with the inscription, as I will show immediately, and always in the same handwriting, with the indication Missionis Sinensis, referring to the original book layer imported in China by Terentius and Trigo. All in all, these inscriptions constitute a very important primary source with unique direct information on the scholarly activities of the Jesuits within China in the 17th, 18th century. Therefore, I will finally now show, if you give me some minutes, some visual examples. And now I will first, this is the title page of the Catalogue de la Bibliothèque du Pétain, made in 1949, which gives a very detailed bibliographical description of the 4,100 volumes still existing in China. The next picture, that's the cover of my own book on this collection, the first volume. And in fact, there are 3 volumes I published on that matter, but this is the book which is dealing with the whole logistic of the acquisition. Then the next one is a book on Johann Schreck Terentius, the man who is responsible for the founding of the Jesuit libraries in China. And then the next one gives you an impression of the cover of the books offered by Pope Paul V in 1615 with his armies.
I'm sorry, Noel, can I interrupt you for a moment? Because you cannot see the pictures.
You cannot see the picture?
Yes, no? Perhaps you have to share your screen.
Does it see?
Doesn't see, no? No?
Oh, yes, now we are going to see something. Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
It's okay?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Even teruggaan.
Do we return or do we continue?
I think we can continue.
Ja. Ik zie niks.
Ja, deze wordt gedeeld waarschijnlijk.
The picture I wanted to present now was the picture with the cover with the armories of the Pope. This one, is it okay? Yeah.
Yes.
This is the original collection, so with the Pope's armory, and a lot of books have still this original book cover. Inside there is a very monumental donation inscription, which I cannot read here because it is a very long one, but it's very, very interesting. The next one, this, for instance, is a copy, you see, a copy of the Observation mathématique, astronomique, etc., by Soucier, a French astronomer in Paris, who published the astronomical observations made by a French colleague in Beijing, Antoine Gobil, with a donation to Reverendo Patri Andrea Pereira, zo kan dat is hier, Pequeno, a Portuguese astronomer in Beijing as well. The book was published in Paris, which with the astronomical observations made and sent from Beijing, but in the printed copy there are a lot of errors. So a book was sent again to Beijing, and the author of the observations, Antoine Gobil, made below the title page a remark that the book was in fact full of errors. I wrote a letter to Paris in order to correct the observations and so on and so on. So there's a whole story around this book revealed by those inscriptions. The next one, Forster. Yeah, there's a copy, a very important book, Georgius Agricola, a very famous book on European mining, sent to Beijing. The inscriptions give us a complete biography, so to speak, of this copy. First, the book was sent as a copy, as a present to a German emperor in Munich, who offered it then to Terentius. Terentius brought it to China. In China, it was translated into Chinese. So you can see also, let me say, below at the right side, the small indication Missionis Sinensis, which proves its presence in China. And then below, you have the stamp of the later library in Beijing in the modern period. The next one, Francis. Yeah, there's a copy, another very important book, Bartolomeo Crescenzio, Nautica Mediterranea of 1607. Also, this book was offered to Tricot and Terentius when they passed in for Flanders in the years 1616, 1670. Below the text, you can see the donation. And the donator, Johannes Faber, a famous botanist in Rome, made a long propempticon or poem to say farewell to the fathers. Yeah, okay, the next one. Another book, Méthode Nouvelle de Guérir le Catarrhe, a medical book, also offered to the Chinese mission, as you can see, Missionis Sinensis, with below Ie Terenti, the owner's mark, the Jesuit Johannes Terentius, who received it as a present, brought it to China, and where it is until today, also with a stamp of the later 19th century Jesuit Lazarist Library in Beijing. Next one, Angelo Sala, a very important alchemistic author. Also, this book was offered, as you can see, to Johannes Terentius, but this time we don't have the full donation inscription, we have only the initials J.T. Johannes Terentius and the indication Missionis Sinensis. Next one. There's a very important book, of course, the Claudius Ptolemaeus Atlas. Once it belonged to the library of the Jesuit college in Würzburg, as you can read here in the inscription. At a certain moment, Johannes Terentius and Tricot passed by in Würzburg. The Jesuits in Würzburg offered it as a present to the mission. They cancelled the inscription, and Terentius made an indication indicating this book comes from the Jesuit library of Beijing, of Würzburg. Below, you can see a French comment made by a French Jesuit. We don't know who it was, but we know it was at least late in the 18th century, who gives some references to a French comment on astronomy. So, and in the same book, you can see that some Jesuit, we don't know exactly who it was, made mathematical drawings as a comment on the texts, which proves that the books were indeed really used, and so on. Yeah. Another one, a very important one, important book, Andreas Argoli, the Ephemeris, so used by the Jesuits to correct the Chinese calendar. We know it was originally a copy of François Clément, a French astronomer who died in 1658. Later, the book was offered to Ferdinand Verbiest, a Flemish Jesuit, who was invited to correct the Chinese calendar. He used it, and we can see in the next pages, he made a whole series of annotations, including meteorological ones, throughout the whole copy, volume 1, 2, and 3. Very important to understand how they observed meteorological meteorological phenomena in China in the years 60, 70, 60, 85. Next one. Yeah, there's another indication about the position, the geographical position of Beijing. Yeah, the next one. A theological book, which was originally part of the collection of the Jesuit College in Leuven, here, next to me. And it was offered when Terentius and Trigo passed by in Leuven in 1670, the month of December. They took it to China, where we can find it again. Yeah, and then maybe one of the last one, a copy of Famiano Strada de Bello Belgico, a very important text also. Originally belonged to the private collection of the Portuguese Irmão brother Francisco Pereira in 1656 in Coimbra. When he died in 1656, he offered it to Martino Martini, who was there at that moment. When he left Portugal for China, he brought the book with him, brought it to his own mission station in Hangzhou, as you can see on the inscription on top of the page. Yeah. And so there's another one, and the last one, a very important book on textbook on astronomy for Jesuit studies, Jesuit students. Antoine Thomas, Synopsis Mathematica. Well, one of those volumes was brought by one of the students of Antoine Thomas in Coimbra to China. At a certain moment, he offered it, José Suarez, he offered it to the China mission, and also this copy is preserved. And so we have more than 2,000 copies of books, which in general give us a very clear idea about how they were managing it to get those books, what they did with those books, and how in detail they were working with those books in function of the projects they had inside the mission. Thank you for your attention.